This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Dito sa bayan natin, ang mga pinag-uusapan ay revolving around the BBL, Bangsamoro Basic Law, which is not yet a law, so it should be Bangsamoro Basic Bill. It's still a bill. Dito sa mga nababalitaan na mga overflights ng US spy plane over the reclamation projects ng China doon sa West Philippine Sea or South China Sea. Diyan paikot-ikot, but basically, everything is still in relation to U.S. foreign policy na nakasabit ang Pilipinas. No? Mamaya, we'll explain the connection ng BBL with the U.S. interest also. But itong nakaraang linggo, may isang malaking bagay sa Asia na nangyari. At yun yung bisita ni Prime Minister Modi, isang bansa na may 1.2 billion ba, 1.1. We'll get the facts later. People, and bumisita siya sa China na may 1.5 billion people, which constitutes mga 40%, tama ba, 40 or 30% of the world's population. Samantalang dito sa atin, sa Pilipinas, pag sinasabing international community, iniisip natin kaagad Europe and US and Britannia. No, the real international community is Asia. At yung bisita ni Modi, we will explain in detail the implications, sabi niya, prior to his trip, sabi niya, Modi said, ayon dito sa isang website sa India, 21st century would be, magiging Asian century. Kung magiging Asian century itong 21st century, ano yung nakaraan? Well, ang tawag doon, Pax Americana. May kapayapaan daw sa ilalim ng pamamahala ng Estados Unidos, ng Amerika, Pax Americana. But as we see, there's so much trouble and wars under Pax Americana. Now, Asia wants to get things into its hands, and we'll analyze this. We have with us Hiro Vaswani, our Filipino of Indian descent, para makita din naman natin kung mayroong mga mas malalim na implikasyon itong bisita, mga statements ng bisita sa bisita ni Modi sa China. And we have Ferdie Pasion of NATFIL, Nationalist Filipinos, nang maiugnay yung mga nangyayari sa foreign policy ng Pilipinas at yung in particular Bangsamoro Basic Bill na pinakamainit na issue ngayon. So let's go to Hiro. You have been following the Modi visit to China?
Yes. Again, it's a return of the reciprocal visit of the Chinese leader to India.
Si Xi Jinping visited India. Correct. 2 weeks ago, maybe?
No, it was some months ago.
Some months ago, yeah.
And it was, again, strengthening the ties between the BRIC countries.
Ano yung BRIC countries?
That's Brazil, Russia, India, and China. In fact, the other Chinese leader is presently touring Brazil and other...
si Li Keqiang.
Latin American
Apparently,
countries.
you haven't memorized the names yet.
No, their names always, Zuronji lost me already.
It takes you the first 5 years to memorize the names,
and
the second 5 years, you memorize it already, then they change the leader.
Correct.
But what about, I'll ask Ferdie there, anong apelido ni Modi, Prime Minister Modi? It'll take you a year maybe to remember it.
His first name is actually Narendra.
That's the first name.
Yeah, Modi is the surname.
Okay. Anyway, sige, just to...
So him I know.
Yeah. Okay, sige.
So essentially, again, the failure of U.S. government and in particular the U.S. Congress to accept the BRIC countries into the executive committee of the IMF World Bank was a disastrous decision for the U.S. government.
So, in other words, matagal nang naghihintay yung China, India, Brazil, and other countries na may upuan sa IMF.
Executive committee.
Executive Committee.
The governing
yung mga
body.
nagdidesisyon.
Correct.
Eh sabi, hindi pwede.
And that has been tabled and recommended by the other membership. And in fact, the other members, there are only going to be 10, U.S. and a few of the G7 countries, to give reality to the emergence of these huge up-and-coming economies, and of course the Soviet Union, that even though that they have...
Russia, you mean?
I'm sorry, Russia. I can't take that out of my mind. You know, they still have a lot of power. They have engineering, aeronautical skills, and all this, and they will be a force to contend with.
Yan ang
again
problema
in
sa
the future.
Pilipinas. You mentioned Russia with so much technology. Yung helicopter issue natin dito, second-hand helicopters, samantalang yung presyo na yun, brand new helicopters na ng Russian yun.
Oh, well, I mean,
hardier, stronger, easier to operate.
Tested. Battle tested.
The Americans bought Russian helicopters for their Afghan operation. Di ba? Well, anyway.
so like I said, the change in global economic realities, the U.S. is continuously still in a state of self-denial.
Pero hindi nga alam dito sa Pilipinas yan eh. As you say, the world is changing.
Correct.
Do you
And
sense it na?
there has been massive shifts in realities in the global economic system.
Are we losing something in this?
Well, essentially, the Americans are operating these multilateral institutions that are slowly becoming obsolete because of their self-denial. And their refusal to accept reality, to accept that the economic future of the planet has moved from west to east. And I think it started some time ago. And the one country that has taken advantage of it, that old architecture, and turned it on its head, was the People's Republic of China. And now they have gone out on their own because they are stuck with the old financial architecture of the
and they,
US. And they are trying to basically maneuver to utilize that old architecture and build a new one with the help of other emerging
we'll go back to
markets.
that, particularly the AIIB. Tanungin natin si Ferdie, anong mga reactions mo doon sa developments na ito?
Well, you mentioned earlier na you were asking what has the Philippines lost in all of this. One thing that we have lost is cheaper and faster internet, for example, that China
slowest pa rin tayo.
can help us build. Railroads and railways that have cheap fares.
Ko, ang North Rail, sinabotahe nila, wala namang ipinalit.
Ang PNR, sinabotahe nila, hindi nila pinapaandar. Tapos ang pamasahe, 60 pesos per head. Sabi nila, mura daw yun. Para sa kanila, mura kasi mayaman sila about yung taong bayan.
Which easily China can finance, di ba?
Yes, and sa financing, mababang interest rate, mahaba ang long-term loans, mas maraming maipapautang, mas malaking halaga. Ang dami.
Yung MRT, dinelay yung delivery nung bagon galing sa China. Ngayon, 8 bagon na lang daw ang tumatakbo. May sumasabotahe.
Satellites, matutulungan tayo kasi archipelago tayo eh. Matutulungan sana tayo ng China for our needs. So,
Drones, napakamura ang mga drones ng China, no? Commercial.
military equipment, no? Not only China's but also Russia's. The jet fighters of Russia now are
Wag natin
better.
pag-usapan jet fighter. Helicopters muna. Pang sagip, pang rescue, ano. Ito, we're stuck in this mess ng helicopter na second hand na puro graft and corruption.
Yung nandun na barko na renowned sa Ayungin Shoal, bulok na bulok, malapit nang mag-disintegrate dahil sa kalawang. So, ano bang naitutulong ng Amerika sa atin? Bakit tayo nagpupumilit na kumampi sa Amerika na dadalhin tayo sa kapahamakan, sa gera laban sa China? At sinusuportahan ng Amerika ang Malaysia with regards to Sabah and the MILF. So, ano ba ito? Talaga bang kaalyado natin ng Amerika o kalaban natin ng Amerika?
We'll get back to that in relation to the BBB later on. Balik tayo. The AIIB, you were going towards that because the Chinese not being accepted by the IMF, nagtayo sila ng sarili na mga financial institutions.
Well, even without the AIIB, China has been sending out a lot of ODAs, basically
Overseas
development assistance,
and
and investing in Latin America and Africa.
Africa, yeah.
And they have to somehow make use of their hoard of foreign reserves because the U.S. has abused that system. And it had resulted in that last financial crisis. And
2008.
2008, and the refusal to basically do something about the economic architecture that rules trade and finance in the world has created a lot of problems.
Anong status ng Pilipinas in relation to AIIB? We're one of the founding members kasi founding members ang Asian, all Asian countries. We are a founding member. Pero wala pa tayong financial contribution. And so from what I last updated, nag-aalanganin ng Pilipinas kung itutuloy o hindi.
I think unfortunately the Philippines will look for leads from the US and
maghihintay
Japan.
na naman ng instruction.
Well, because most of our ODAs basically come from Japan. Japan has announced that it will start its own infrastructure fund.
In response to AIIB?
Oh, yeah.
So malinaw na they are reactionary. Hindi yung sila nagsisimula ng kawang gawa, kundi yung kabila, maunahan tayo.
Again, because Japan is a surplus financial country, and it has experience in emerging markets. Because
But
of
how
its,
much fund are they offering?
They
I listened to an assessment at I agree with it. This is just Japan. AIIB will be 40 plus countries resources together. It will have 50 times more resources than Japan can ever offer.
I wouldn't hold too much as far as who has the most resources, etc., etc. The issue is Ben Bernanke came up. He started writing his own blog, and he says the serious consequences of the broken financial system hasn't changed. You have countries with so much surplus capital, and that capital, he called it that global imbalance, has to be cured. And they asked him, what's your solution? Do we impose sanctions, etc., etc.? And he came out very nicely and said, ask nicely.
Ask nicely who? China? In
Obviously,
particular? Okay.
in particular. Ask nicely.
Yeah. But, well, one fact is that with more than 40 countries in AIIB, each contributing $1 billion, China contributing 50 billion, Russia contributing, I think, 25 billion. Mas malaki talaga yan. But what Japan is doing is trying to hold on to their alliance with the Philippines, siguro.
No, Japan has been, you have to understand, Japan has been the first country, even apart from the US, that has invested heavily in the past.
Yeah. But let us explain to the public. A surplus country, what does that mean? It has surplus savings?
Yes, it's a creditor nation.
May cash siya. cash.
May pera.
May pera siya.
At
Ang
may-
US ba, hindi na, ano?
The US
surplus
is the
country.
largest debtor nation on the
Mangungutang,
planet.
hindi magpapautang.
But the only advantage the US has, which is unique, is all US foreign debt is denominated
in dollars that
in
they
their
print.
own currency, which they control.
They print themselves.
And that is an anomaly, basically, that was created by the US.
But as you know, that is also their problem.
It
Because
is
they-
also a big problem
big
for
problem.
them.
Oh, they cannot manage.
They cannot use their currency in a competitive devaluation scene because it is a safe haven currency. Whenever there's problems anywhere in the world, people exchange their money into dollars and send it to the
so
US.
if the US dollar is strong, yung export nila mahal.
Mahal.
So
And that
Detroit
makes-
will continue to be depressed.
And
ano?
it makes imports so much cheaper. And that was what caused the first, that major crisis in 2008 when all countries were forced to basically send their savings into the US. And this is the anomaly of the last 30 years.
Okay. Well, we have to go back to Modi's dream to make this the Asian century. Mukhang malinaw ba na nagiging Asian century nga? Ang surplus countries are Japan, China,
And
even
the oil-producing economies.
that means
Saudi
Middle
Arabia.
East. That is
Middle
also
East, that's
Asia.
also Asia.
That's
Russia.
also Asia.
Russia
Then
is not a creditor nation.
Yeah, but it is Asian
It's an
country.
oil-rich country.
May mga
No,
debate.
again, you see, you can say Russia is because Russia spans 8 time
Yeah.
zones. Okay, it's a European, Asian because it's got the Pacific and it's
But
got
it's
the
a
Baltic.
bigger part of Russia is in Asia.
Also, most important, the decision to pivot to Asia. Hindi lang naman US ang nag-pivot to Asia.
Yeah,
Russia
Russia.
pivoted to Asia. They're beginning to define themselves as Asian. And that's important because Asia is not yung singkit lang o yung mga maliliit. Ano? Russians are also Asians. That was in the conference in UP I attended the other day was a Kazakh woman who is married to a Filipino.
Well, Kazakhs are Central Asians.
Yeah, that's Asian nga. Di ba?
Used to be part of the Soviet Union.
We Asians must think broader about
Well, you have to
being
understand the
Asia.
Middle East is part of Western Asia. Is Western Asia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Western Asia, yeah.
Because the line which divides basically Asia and Europe is basically up there near Turkey.
Yeah. Well, and in that conference in UP with Jay Batongbakal, Attorney Jay Batongbakal, because he has focused on the UNCLOS, no? In the passionate discussion after, I said, no, imperialism is an invention of the West. Ang Asian history, there are a lot of conflicts and wars, but never outside of their own regions, di ba?
Well, the last Asian, or you could call him an imperialist, was Temujin, which was Genghis Khan.
But
Well, he basically took over most of China and was riding towards Europe.
But
I mean, he was the...
was it imperialism
No,
or it was
it
not
was just
imperialism?
looking for havens for food and, expanding.
Expansionism.
But it is a little different because when you say imperialism, you have to attach capitalism to it.
Yeah.
Because the problems of capitalism will lead to imperialism.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the definition started with whom? With Marx, imperialism, or
No,
Lenin, or even earlier?
Well, earlier. I mean, the issue of capitalism, capital comes from the word cattle, property. And Marx's version of capitalism, he says that the owners of capital or production, and that means a number of assets, basically use power basically to seize control of political systems. And that leads to conflicts and wars.
Yeah, now, so going back to the Asian century, ang ugat nitong Asian century is really the non-aligned movement, di ba? Farther back, in the 50s.
Sina Jawaharlal Nehru
and so on.
Well, again, you have to understand, the financial markets call it, the definition basically, you have the highly industrialized economies, the newly industrialized economies, which became part of the emerging markets. Emerging markets was the term because of the fall of the Cold War, where everybody moved into market systems, including China. And the issue of the Philippines, you have to understand, since the American invasion and colonization of the Philippines, the long-term plans of the U.S. was to use the Philippines as a commercial and military base for the eventual,
paano na ngayon? Mukhang
which is basically still part of the plan. The Philippines is a fixed aircraft carrier for the U.S. They can put in bases in any part of the Philippines they so wish.
And that went on unchallenged for the past 50 years, at least 70 years.
And
But
it
China
is happening
is now
today.
establishing permanent
Yes, and
island bases also. Ano?
Exactly. And China has seen that because China's history of being colonized, and they call
Attacked
it
from the sea 470
exactly,
times.
years of shame, basically against the imperial powers. They've decided to be proactive and basically establish, and these are basically radar and communication facilities, basically in the South China Sea. And they have fortified their claims on these islands. Of course, it is detrimental to the Philippines because of the new UNCLOS, etc., etc., and this has to be decided going forward.
Well, what may be negative from one point of view can be a positive thing from another point of view. That will forestall any interference of the United States in the region again, so that the neighborhood can talk to each other.
The U.S. also plays with two decks of cards when it comes to China. They are in a constructive engagement, and they are also, on the other hand, viewing to contain both the economic
so, two
and
decks
military.
of cards.
They play with two decks of cards.
Tanong ko kay ang Pilipinas, ilang barahang nilalaro?
Obvious naman we're just playing the American card, and the Philippines has been adamantly refusing to engage in bilateral talks with China. Of course, may sul-sul dyan yung Amerika na kinakailangan multilateral. Alam naman ng Amerika at alam naman ng lahat that China will never accede to multilateral talks. So, who is the one that is really for peace here? Is it China or America? Because America is always at the back of our Philippine president, always advising the Philippine side to be antagonistic towards China, to have some stunts and perform some, naughty things. Hindi natin naiisip na hindi ito laro, no? At 100 million Filipino lives are at stake here. How can we uplift the broad masses of the Filipino people from poverty if we keep on with this charade? And as we know, the US dollar is about to lose its value because of quantitative easing. Printa sila ng printa ng dolyar na wala namang halaga.
Doon, may diskusyon kami kagabi while going home from the tingin ni Hiro, which of course the US Federal Reserve is announcing, they will have to raise interest rates. No? Sabi ko, hindi ba sobrang takot sila? Nagko-condition sila ng mind, pero gagawin ba talaga nila? Well, apparently we'll have to extend our discussion into a part 2. Our other guest is in an emergency petition sa Energy Regulatory Commission.
Oh, okay.
Kasi we're in a struggle there also. But we'll explain later in the second half. So tuloy natin, we have 5 minutes sa first part natin. Let's go back to the Asian century. Paano tayo makakakalas na dito sa outmoded, obsolete foreign policy na nakatali sa Estados Unidos and move on to the Asian century?
Paano nga tayo makakakalas? Yung mismong presidente natin nag-issue ng executive order. Kasi ang China ngayon tsaka Russia nag-iipon ng ginto. Dahil alam nila na babagsak na yung dolyar eh. China has about 7,000 tons of gold. Ang Pilipinas nag-issue ng executive order na yung ating gold production, halimbawa dyan sa Diwalwal, pagka nagbenta ka ng ginto sa central bank, tataksan ka na napakataas. So, nangyayari ngayon, nag-smuggle out ng ginto. Instead of getting all our local
in
production.
In the past, it's the Philippine Central Bank that buys the gold.
Oo. So, ngayon, nangyayari ngayon, i-smuggle out yung ginto natin, yung sarili nating ginto, at bumibili from abroad ng mas mahal na ginto, yung ating central bank. At patuloy na karamihan ng ating foreign reserves in the form of US dollars.
Well, Hiro is a finance man. Do you have any reaction to that?
Well, like I said, I have no disrespect for people who think that the world should go back to strictly
gold standard.
a
Yeah.
gold standard. But again, whatever standard you wish, the issue is simple. The financial system or the banking system is based on a fractional reserve system.
Yeah, but before we get into that, we'll get lost into another,
Okay.
technical discussion. The fact is, the Asian century is turning out to be a century of gold gatherers. For example, you know that the top buyers of gold are India, China, and Russia today. Why?
When you say the top buyers, basically on the retail level. In fact, the government has had to put the brakes.
Yeah, but the government of China has been encouraging the citizens to buy.
You can encourage because you see China, as far as China's savers have very little options on where to put their savings. That's why the government says, oh, put it into
But
gold.
isn't that also an act to discourage them from saving in dollars?
No, because again, you have capital account controls in China. You cannot save in U.S. financial assets internally. It's against the law. Okay?
You have to convert to renminbi.
Correct.
Okay.
So they have very few options because their financial markets are also limited. And you have a large state sector.
But the premise, as you stated, is retail. But I read contrary to that, even Russia is building up its gold reserve.
We can go on for days to see whether, you know, that there's going to be a dollar collapse. Actually, a dollar collapse would be beneficial for the United States.
Because it will depreciate.
Exactly.
The value
you
of
see,
US
currencies
goods.
operate always in tandem.
Yeah.
They never operate solely.
No.
There is always an exchange rate for gold against major currencies. There is always an exchange rate.
We cannot get too technical,
But
let's go to Ferdie first.
more than finances, what's important is the actual physical development of a country. The building of railroads,
of
the
course.
building of factories, whereby the Philippines will be able to export products instead of human beings.
Or reduce imports of products.
Because what we have now is a casino economy. For example, and then we inherited it from the United States. In the U.S., the big capitalists, the oligarchs, are able to buy at even negative interest rates. Negative interest rates. And then they will invest it in their own stocks to boost up the price of their stocks artificially.
We'll continue with that in the second part. Reaction done. Because negative interest rates is a reality in Europe. And
you have to understand the highly industrialized economies of the world are in a state of managed depression.
Managed depression. Okay.
There is a crisis, a capitalist crisis. Okay, the Eurozone is about to break up. Their reluctance to move into a fiscal political union, which is absolutely necessary for fiat currency, because the euro is an artificial currency. That's why the US dollar is reigning still supreme, because there is still no competition. And that is bad for America, it is bad for the world.
Okay, we're near the break. What about this problem? China, as reported by Julie Abdasa of the Manila Daily Bulletin, has told a Philippine delegation visiting a journalist that China will be an international reserve currency very soon.
Well, again, China's inclusion in the SDRs of the IMF, that will allow, it's a first step.
It's a first step, yeah.
That for countries basically to use China as a reserve currency. But the problem is the flexibility and convertibility of the RMB into other financial assets, because the economy or the financial economy of China is closed to the world.
They must be preparing, otherwise they would not announce it to people.
You have to understand that the intricacies of becoming an international reserve currency is okay. The pound is a reserve
Okay.
currency.
That means that's another long discussion. We'll
Correct.
have to wait for the second part. But this is all part of the Asian century.
Correct.
Otherwise, if this is not the Asian century, we wouldn't be discussing this.
Correct.
Okay, let's take this break.